All right, great. Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Hillary. I'm a co-director of programming at BPMA. I'm joined by Prachi Bavalkar, who's on as well, who's also a co-director of programming. We have Dave Robbins, who's president of BPMA. And then I think I just saw David also join, who also recently joined the, David Tabieri, who joined the events team or the programming team as well. So we got a few BPMA folks on. I'm sure a few others will join as well. But welcome, thanks for joining us. If you've never attended a BPMA event before, we'll give a little bit of a background on what BPMA is and what we offer, and where you can find out more information. But tonight's, I almost said episode, tonight's event is who you know, developing your professional product network. So a lot about networking and how to kind of build strong product relationships and networks, both within your org and outside of it. So I will introduce our speaker, but before I do that, just a little bit of background. So for an agenda for tonight, do a real quick kickoff and intro to BPMA. I'm going to pass it over to JB, our guest star for the night, and then for the presentation, and then we'll set aside some time at the end for Q&A. Just some quick guiding principles. We've been trying to kind of encourage more engagement during these sessions. So, you know, I don't expect that we'll have hundreds of people, so feel free to at any point, you know, drop a question in the chat or raise your hand to come off mute and ask a question directly. We definitely want to build a strong community here and meet you all and build relationships. So if you're comfortable, feel free to put your camera on. If you're eating dinner and you want to leave it off, totally fine. But you know, we're here and would love to meet you. Definitely encourage networking, as in theme with the event for tonight. So in the Zoom chat, if you could, at some point over the next few minutes, just share your name, what your role is, where you work or attend school, and then where you're based. So it's just great to get a sense of who everyone is and where they're from. And we'll do the same in the chat when we get a second. But and share your LinkedIn's if you'd like. If you want to connect with one another, feel free to drop links to your LinkedIn and any other way you want to contact one another. And then again, ask questions as we go. So these sessions are for you. We want to make sure, you know, we've definitely prepared some content and some best practices and some insights, but if you have questions about this topic, we want to make sure that we answer those for you and that you can also share your insight with one another. So don't be shy, feel free to ask questions either in the chat or come off mute. So BPMA, if you are not familiar with us, we're Boston Product Management Association. We're based in Boston, made up of a team of volunteers who organizes events. So Prachi and myself and David form the programming team. We typically do one big monthly event on different topics related to the product industry and product management or product marketing roles. We also publish content on our website. So BPMA has a blog that we have a team of content writers who contribute to that. Feel free to check that out right on our website. We have a mentorship program that you can apply for. And we have a job board. I'll show you a slide in just a minute that has some of the most recent job postings. Right now we have, I think I checked today, we have over 30 job postings on the site. We have, as part of that job board, you have the name of the hiring manager as well, who is typically either involved in BPMA or connected to someone through BPMA as well. This is just a slide to show you our amazing sponsors. So feel free to check them out. A lot of them offer services related to, you know, the product field. So there could be a lot of value in these for you as well. As I mentioned, we have a job board on the site. So these are the most recent 4, but as I said, we have, I think, over 30 postings that are up and live at the moment. So all ranges, both local and also remote jobs, varying levels of experience. And again, you can see we've got the company, but also hiring contact there as well. So you can feel free to check them out. And again, got a mentorship program. There are 2 tracks that are available for you to apply to if you're interested. So one is a one-on-one mentorship program where it's really catered to people who are already in the product field who want to continue to grow and level up their skills, make connections. And then the other track is for aspiring and job seeking folks, the people who are interested in breaking into product management. So feel free to just take a look right on our website and you can find the right people to contact. But we have a mentorship team that runs this program. And then lastly, I want to mention, as part of BPMA membership, if you go check out the membership options and benefits on the website, we have a Slack community with about 1,000 product professionals currently, and we have all kinds of channels for these events, other events that are being hosted by other organizations, career advice channel, jobs, women in product, and a whole bunch of other channels as well. So again, want to promote that networking, feel free to check this out. We've pulled a couple of questions from the Slack channels as well for tonight's session. All right, and I'm going to pass it over to JB to introduce himself, but I was going to mention as well, I have worked with JB back at eRecruit a few years back for a couple of years, and we were colleagues for a few years there, and I think he'll mention in his session, in his presentation, if he doesn't, I'll ask him about it, but he ran a great training program there for new hires, and I was in one of the first classes that he ran, so he was very much a, a mentor and a trainer for me, and definitely have some direct experience with all things JB. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and have JB take it away and share his screen so you can see his presentation.
Awesome.
But again, feel free to drop questions as we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Hillary. I really appreciate it. I will talk about that experience in just a moment. I'm going to try to keep track. So if you see me looking down, I'm just like watching, being mindful of time. But definitely, if you feel like I'm lingering too long on anything, feel free to redirect me so that I'm making sure I'm treating everyone's time with value. So just kind of overview of what I'm going to hope to cover with everyone today is just a little bit about myself, why your network is important, how to build peer relationships, the concept of being T-shaped, some suggestions on how to manage up, so how to actively participate in a relationship with your manager, how to build cross-company connections, and by this I mean building connections with people you do not work with necessarily day-to-day and might only interact with more occasionally, how to recognize and take advantage of opportunities when you can mentor other people, how to stay connected to people, especially over job changes, how to keep connections alive and prevent them from going stale, and then briefly introduce some additional resources to consider if people are interested. So jumping in a little bit about myself, my go-to fact about myself is I come from a big family. I have 7 older siblings, so I'm the youngest of 8 children. My oldest sibling is 23 years older than I am, and my brother closest to me in age is 3 years older than I am. So we are over quite a range. One thing that I think coming from my large family in particular helped me with is I like to think of things in terms of spectrums. So if you imagine a spectrum where one end is being disruptive or valuing challenging the status quo, and the other end is smoothing things over or valuing harmony, I tend to skew a little bit towards smoother. So that'll be the perspective that my advice comes from. I am working to kind of push a little bit back and be more willing and more comfortable and confident challenging things. But that's kind of where I am today. A little bit about like my path to my current spot. I went to the College of New Jersey, which is just a public school in a suburb of Trenton, New Jersey. And I studied art history, so liberal arts major, definitely not directly connected to product management or software development at all. It was a really good opportunity to learn both about different periods in time and different cultures around the world, and develop some skills around how to make good arguments, how to be critical of things that are being presented to you and check for logical consistency. So definitely skills that I think I indirectly use in my day-to-day job, but not a direct path. Which led to, in my early 20s, a little bit of a circuitous route where I was like trying to find myself and where I fit in, because I didn't think that academia or the fine arts world was really a good spot. I was a customer service manager at Target, and then after that, I worked as a front-end manager in restaurants. So I had a good deal of experience in customer service. A lot of stories, if we connect later, that I can share with you that are funny now, a little less funny when I had to deal with them, but still a good time. And what that enabled me to do is I had and still have a very good friend, Shane, and they worked at eRecruit, which is a company that produces software for the staffing industry. They've since been acquired by Bullhorn, but when I worked for them, that had not yet happened. And eRecruit was hiring for a role that was 50% customer support and 50% quality assurance. You could have either one of those skills and they would train you in the other. So Shane referred me, I got the job, and that was kind of my entry into tech. Think I realized pretty quickly that I wanted to work in software, but it was still a bit of time before I got to work in product. At eRecruit, like I said, first did 50-50 customer support and QA, and then they separated the roles, and I opted to go towards QA because I felt I had already a good amount of experience in customer support. And after being at eRecruit for a little bit over a year, the leadership team approached me and one of my coworkers, Kevin, and said, hey, you two have both learned a lot about our software and how our company operates on your own over the past year. We want to hire both recent college graduates and people who are interested in changing their careers and have you teach them everything you learned in a year, but you only have 6 months to do it. Are you up for it? And we said, yes, we are. And it ended up being what I still consider the most rewarding professional experience I've had. It's now pushing up on almost a decade ago, which makes me feel really old, but I'm still really proud of the time we spent there. As it turns out that Kevin and I were able to do it in 3 months. So we got to have 2 classes. So the first class is what Hillary mentioned, she was part of, and then we had a class after it. I really valued the opportunity. It was the first time I really felt I was well positioned to teach people things that I had knowledge that was worth sharing with other people. Develop my own connections with 2 really dynamic and wonderful sets of people. And then also as part of exiting the program, there were opportunities across the company. So you might go into business analytics, training, customer support, quality assurance, sales or recruiting, and helping the team make connections in all those different departments and explore what might be interesting to them and try to identify what one of my mentors, Andy, taught me is called the iron triangle. So what is someone good at? What is someone interested in? And what does the company need? And how do you find that good spot? That was a really great experience at eRecruit and has made me really interested in being a people manager, developing my own relationships with mentors, and continuing to be a mentor for others when the opportunity comes up. That led me to working at DraftKings, where I've worked for almost 7 years now. I started in quality assurance, moved to be a product owner, and currently work in product operations. So I try, the really succinct way to describe my job is that I'm kind of an owner of process for the product team. So how do we go about doing things? What are the tools and systems that we need for success? And how do I help a really diverse set of teams that is spread not only across the United States, but also into Europe and the Middle East, find processes that work for them. It's really exciting and rewarding. And it's definitely a people heavy job. A couple just quick things about myself. I'll try to move through those quickly so we can get to the content. Is 3 interests for myself. So 1, I have this picture of animals. I love zoology. I love learning about animals. In particular, I like animals that have non-human animals that have a lot of intelligence. So corvids, crows and ravens, whales, dolphins, porpoises, and octopuses. And I think octopuses are probably my favorite animals. I think it's really cool, really intelligent. So I get excited for any octopus news. And my downtime, I like to spend time playing World of Warcraft. If you play video games or play World of Warcraft, I play a feral druid, which is a character that has the magic power to turn into a giant cat. So my interest in zoology kind of connects to my interest in that video game. And then I'm a hobbyist Pythonista. So I'm not very good and I can't produce like commercial quality programs, but I definitely like playing with it. Oftentimes I'll use it. I learned it in the context of data science. So pulling in spreadsheets into Jupyter Notebook, which is a development environment, and being able to clean the data, manipulate the data, produce charts and things like that. So a lot of fun for me. So those are some things I do to spend my time. Putting kind of like jumping into the content and putting the bottom line on top. It's really, really important to emphasize that strong connections can really give you an edge, both in your current role and when finding a new role. I think when people think of their network, they often think about finding the next opportunity, which is definitely a big part of it. but hopefully what you see today as we go through the slides is that there's a lot of value in your current role and operating more successfully and continuing to grow your career where you are today as you build out your network. So some of the benefits of having a strong network include adding things to your toolkit. So that can be hard and soft skills. Hard skills are things like being able to manipulate data with SQL, pull information for analytics, produce visualizations in Tableau, or be able to build an API in C#. Soft skills are things around like communication and managing people. You can also get different approaches. So how do different people look at things? How can you challenge your own assumptions and how you show up to different challenges and problems? And also having phone a friend lifelines. So even though I've been at DraftKings for almost 7 years now, there are still new concepts that I get introduced to pretty frequently. And sometimes things get explained really well in the meeting, and sometimes it seems like I am the only one in the meeting who doesn't know what someone's talking about. So having a list of people that I can go to and say, hey, like, I did not get what that was about at all. Can you explain it to me? Is super helpful. Basically kind of a safe space where I can explain something to them. And then oftentimes people will use me as that. And they tend to come to me with like, hey, why is this thing happening? Or why are you about this in a certain way? I'd like to know more, but I don't want to feel like I'm challenging it. So it kind of works bi-directional that way. Just the opportunity to learn from other people's experiences. One of my mentors, and I'll talk a little bit about her again later, but her name is Melanie. She's awesome. She shared with me a story about she used to work for a phone company, and the CEO was out with his wife and his cell phone died, so he had to use a payphone. And he was like, oh, like, I wonder how many people actually use this payphone. I'm gonna ask. So he came into the office on Monday and he asked an intern, hey, can you just tell me how many people have used that payphone? I'm kind of interested. My wife and I were talking about it. The intern starts to pull the data. His supervisor finds out about it, and it ends up getting blown up into this huge project where the CEO shows up to a meeting. He's not quite sure what's going on. And there's this big presentation about payphone usage and whether or not it's a valuable part of their business, which was not his intent at all. So it's a really good story about how leaders can have outsized impact when they're not clear, and when people are assuming their intent. And it's I think it illustrates that concept very well, and I've definitely experienced it. But she gave me a really great way to explain that concept. I think resonates with a large number of people, and I didn't have that experience myself. And I got that because she was my mentor and she was helping me be able to explain something. It also creates avenues for continual self-improvement and development. I think that people always have something that they can learn. So having a mentor who can teach you new skills and challenge yourself and be able to grow is really important. And then you have a pool of people who can be a reference, who can refer you for new opportunities, and can also give you inside scoop on a company. So one thing to keep in mind as you search for jobs, that if you're older, you might have learned already, but when you're interviewing for a job, like, you're also interviewing the company. So getting that inside perspective and being able to understand someone who knows how you work and what your strengths are and what works well for you, and be able to tell you if a company that they work for or have worked for before may or not be a good fit, can be really valuable, because changing a job and finding out that you're a bad culture fit for a company can be pretty disruptive. Just one advice, if you take nothing else away from today, is that make sure you're sincere when you're trying to create connections. I have a lot of advice to talk about, like, how you might create connections. And I think people tend to view themselves as better actors than they are. So sometimes people will come about something to be very transactional. And hey, I want to form this relationship, so I'll ask something I don't really care about in the hopes of establishing a rapport. And I apologize if anybody works in this field, but it kind of comes across as a used car salesman kind of thing, and people tend to see through it. And it can actually hinder your ability to create a deeper connection. So find something that you really care about if you're going to ask someone to take their time to talk to you about it or give you advice on it. Really, really be sincere is super important. And the other thing is always view yourself as being in the driver's seat. Your network isn't something that just happens to you. It's not something that gets handed to you. Like, maybe for some people it might, but really you need to always view yourself at every different level and every different opportunity as having been an active participant. So the first level of connections that you can make are people on the same team. So thinking of this audience, it's probably going to be product managers. So what are other product managers at your company? If you work for a really small company, you might not have tons of opportunity there. But if you work for a mid-sized to large company, even if you have a different reporting structure, building connections with other product managers is going to be super helpful because they already have all the context and understand the challenges that you're trying to do, the goals that the company has, and you can connect with each other and figure out how to help each other be better. So when you're going, you have a peer, another product manager, like, hey, like I want to make a connection with them. I want to start building my network. I think they're a really great person, or I think I have a lot to learn from them. The first thing to keep in mind is make sure you're deliberate about it. But deliberate doesn't necessarily mean formal. So deliberate is setting aside time and saying, hey, at this specific time, what I want to do is sit and talk with you about X. I have a particular topic, and I want to pick your brain on it, or I want to talk to you about it, or I want to learn from you on it. You can do it over coffee, you can do it over lunch. When I think of formal, I think of like more a sit down meeting with a rigid agenda. I'm not saying those are bad things. And if that is a format that works for you and works for the person you're working with, I definitely have had successes with those things, but it doesn't have to be, and it can be more casual, but you want to make sure that you set aside time for it and don't just wait for it to happen. I think it's even more importance over the last couple of years, because before a lot of people could just go to a coworker's desk randomly and, hey, we're both sitting here, how can we catch up and talk? And it's harder to do that, especially as more people are remote. Even when we go back to hybrid, you may not be in the office the same day as someone. So setting aside that time for a video meeting or a phone call, I think can be super powerful. One thing to keep in mind as you are working with your coworker, and this is, I think, is going to be advice that's true for all levels here, is balance talking and listening. So you want to make sure that you're hearing what the other person has to say, open to opportunities where you might be able to teach them something. So maybe as a product manager, you have really good specs and you cover like your use cases are really strong, and you have a really great sense of what should be MVP and what should be fast follow. And your coworker is really, really good at business cases and pulling together analytics to make the case for why their feature is a good idea for the company to pursue. And how can you help each other learn those different skills so that you both walk away being good at both things? I would think through a topic, experience, or challenge you want to talk to in advance. Like, you don't want to just say like, hey, like, you're a great person, I could learn from you, like, let's talk. Some people are really charismatic, naturally charismatic, and that might be a situation that works very well for them. But it can be harder than you think. So you want to have an idea of what you want to get from the meeting, at least one specific thing to start the conversation, so you're not kind of sitting there in awkward silence. Having a first meeting be tactical, even if over time it becomes looser, is going to set you up for better success than starting a little bit too loose and then someone getting the impression that working with you is not time well spent. So they end up deprioritizing you against other items on their schedule. Particularly with the peer relationships, you want to make sure you're still being solution oriented. A lot of times peers will reach out to each other when they're experiencing a frustration or something's not going well, and it's okay to share that frustration. And having a shared sense of frustration is a way that you can build a personal connection with somebody, but you don't want that to be the only thing you do. Unless all you're looking for is a event session, that's fine if that's what you're looking for. But if you're really trying to build something deeper or broader than that, you want to make sure that you balance, hey, I'm frustrated about X. What do you think we could do about that? Or how could I learn this thing from you that I saw you handle the situation really well? This person's really difficult. They always shut me down. And somehow you convince them to get on board with your idea. How did you do that? What do you think about? How did you anticipate their questions? So you kind of sharing the frustration, but also thinking about how to move the situation to a better state. And then being tactical, I think is just always good advice to make a meeting feel useful. And that's like, what is a follow-up action item or a takeaway that you can leverage? Hey, like the earlier example, like, hey, like I'm good at product specs, you're good at business cases. I want to get your perspective on business cases. Do you mind? Sorry. Hit my phone. Do you mind if I run my business case I'm working on past you so you can let me know how I might be able to improve it? And then that kind of just keeps the relationship more than just that one meeting.
Yeah, I think that I was going to add, JB, I think that peer relationships one is it should be such an obvious one, but I know for me personally, it's one that I don't take advantage of as often as I should. Just thinking about, I mean, I am at a larger organization than I was previously used to. So I have a good amount of product management direct peers, but we all kind of own different domains and are on different teams. And so, you end up working a little bit in a silo just to keep your head down and focus on your own deliverables. And I don't think too often about reaching out to a peer on a totally different team, we're all performing the same types of things and exercising the same types of skills. And how can I learn from them, from my peers about how to be better at those skills. I just feel like it's a really underutilized relationship, for me at least. I don't know if anyone else feels the same way.
For what it's worth, I agree with you. I think that people don't often think of it when you're thinking about developing relationships. I think people tend to target people above them as a typical a typical mentor type relationship. But it's really underutilized. And the more you can work on it, I think the better.
Right. Even just trying to become better at a particular soft skill or hard skill, to your point, I would think first of going to my manager to ask, how can I improve in this way, and not go to a peer who might be already good at it. So
yeah, and one point that raises is a lot of people sometimes everyone's relationship with their manager is different, and I'll talk a little about that more in a second. But it's very common for people to be concerned about looking foolish in front of their manager and not being knowledgeable. So there are certain questions we silence ourselves from asking. And if you don't ask your peers, then essentially it's just on you. And learning doesn't work that way. You're not going to magically come up with an answer. And sometimes you can Google something and figure it out. You're trying to figure out how to make Excel do something, maybe you can get that on your own. But it'll probably be easier if someone teaches you how to do it, and just create that relationship where it's like, hey, I can ask you how to do something, you can ask me how to do something, and it kind of builds a sense of camaraderie. Hey, when we're having a challenge or one of us is better than the other, this is a safe space, and that safe space feeling is really powerful in building personal connection. Oops, sorry, skip the slides. Wanted to touch on the concept of being T-shaped. So if you're not familiar, being T-shaped is the vertical line is the depth of expertise in your core. So if we're talking about product managers, it's like being a really good product manager. Whatever skills you think go into that, might be business analysis, it might be creating specs and writing user stories and incorporating user feedback, but things like that. And then the horizontal line is being effective in related areas. Product management is a really hard thing because exactly what is an adjacent field for you might vary depending on what company you're working for. So I think some just common ones, and hopefully at least some of them resonate with everybody today, are engineering or development, the people who are building the stuff that you're speccing out, user experience and user interface designers, user research, analytics, quality assurance, could be marketing, customer experience or support, and business intelligence teams. As an example, understanding how a QA analyst or QA engineer does their job can be really helpful, because their perspective is, how can I break the software that you're building? So understanding what mindset they go through and how they go about breaking things can help you understand how do I make sure that I cover the right use cases, and also kind of having a sense of understanding of impact, because sometimes they might be able to break software by doing something super weird that you consider as an edge case. And sometimes they're doing stuff that they just you're using it how you asked it to be built, so you know how it works. But a QA engineer is coming at it from a different perspective. So how can you learning from them and how they do their jobs will help make you make more robust software. And then it also offers practical opportunities to just be helpful. So maybe you're behind on testing and you can just jump on and do some web testing for your team or something like that. Would be really useful to be able to in thinking about being T-shaped. And honestly, the best way I think about actually going and trying to be T-shaped is when you have a coworker that has a skill that you want to develop, ask them about it. Or it can even doesn't necessarily have to be a skill. It can just be an area of knowledge that you're hoping to gain. So I was in a meeting with a data science team and they were talking about multi-armed bandits. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And the director of data science engineering was like, set up some time on my calendar and I'll walk you through it. And he helped me better understand. So if you are familiar with testing software, a lot of times, and historically what the predominant methodology was A/B testing. So 50% of users will see A, 50% of users will see B. We'll run it for a set amount of time until we get statistical significance. And then we'll make a determination about which one is better. But sometimes you learn early on that A is really a lot better than B. So you're knowingly giving a large part of your user base a poorer experience. So multi-armed bandit testing is a way to use data science to say, when we are seeing better behaviors, a better defined set of behavior from people, we can move them from B into A. So over time, A is a larger percent of the population because we think A is the better experience, but we don't do it to the extent that we lose statistical significance or meaningful analysis that would prove that A is better, other than we're just putting more people into it. So no, I can't create multi-armed bandit testing myself, but I know what it's used for. And then it's enabled me to ask intelligent questions in different meetings about how we're going about testing. And then also, like, now I have a good relationship with Bradley where I can ask him, hey, like, can you explain this to me? And he's come to me and asked me for stuff too. So just something to keep in mind. And also, I just wanted to say, like, thinking about peer relationships, I'm using peer here to be loosely. So it's basically anyone you're not working for. Sometimes at a company, like my company has levels where the CEO is level 1 and the most junior employee is level 11, and everyone falls into one of the numbers in between. It doesn't, I don't mean peer to mean the same number as you. So maybe you're a level 7 or equivalent at your company. And I'm just thinking about level 7s. It's basically anyone you're working with, even if they're a level 3 and you're working together and collaborating on a project. That's how I would approach it and kind of have that loose definition of what a peer is. Touching a little bit on making the most of a relationship with your manager and managing up. So there are lots of different ways that you can be a good manager. And what a good manager looks like for me has changed for myself over time and might look very different than, for example, what a good manager looks like for Hillary. So you need to just spend some time being a little bit introspective and trying to understand what does a good manager look like for you so that you can be an active participant in helping your manager be that. Sometimes people have really bad managers that just don't care. But in my experience, and maybe I've just been really lucky, like managers want to be good. And I've had managers that have frustrated me, but like, it's not because they didn't care or they were trying to frustrate me. It's that they just, I was unable to articulate what I needed from them or was not confident enough to ask them to change the way that they were doing something. And I lost out on that. And then now my relationship with them was bad when it didn't necessarily have to be that way. So you want to have a two-way street with your manager, and how can you change to adapt their style, and how can you ask them to change to adapt to your style? The one thing that I've just, in talking with a lot of junior people in our field, has been like, my manager is really busy. And yes, I get it. Everyone is busy. If you work for a busy company, especially if you're working for a software company that's somewhat close to the startup stage or just coming out of the startup stage and developing or growing very rapidly, everyone's going to have a lot on their plate. You need to keep in mind that you deserve their time. Like, that is not a favor they're doing for you. That is an expectation you should be able to have. You don't want to go in guns blazing and say, hey, you never give me time. Like, I want a meeting right this second. But you want to be confident enough to say, hey, like, I want to make sure we have our one-on-ones. Or I notice you're always late for our one-on-ones. Is there a better time that we can have our one-on-ones? Because I really want the full half hour with you, or the full whatever that time period is, to make sure that you get their time and attention to work on things. Another way that time comes into play is a lot of times through no ill intent, managers end up using one-on-ones, which should be about developing you and making sure that you're getting feedback about how to be better at your job and how to find success more easily at your current role. Ends up being a project status meeting. Project status meetings and one-on-ones with your manager are totally different things. So don't let your manager unintentionally substitute one for the other. Make sure you carve out clear time. A lot of times people show up for meetings with their manager and they're like, what do you need from me? What homework do you have for me? What questions do you have? How can I show you that I'm doing a good job? And it's really, really important that you, again, the note I touched on earlier is like, you feel like you're in the driver's seat. So every time you're sitting down with your manager, you should have something a question you want answered, or something that you want to share. Hey, I noticed this thing. Can I get your thoughts on it? I worked on this project and I'm having trouble with it. Or I haven't worked on this project and it went really well, and I want to make sure you know that. I made this connection that was really cool. Or I did, outside of work, I read this article about a different agile approach and I thought that was really interesting. What if we try that here? But you always want to show up to the meeting with a specific thing to talk about. And again, that's going to just make sure that the time feels valuable and well spent. And that when you show up with something to talk about, it makes it really likely that you're going to talk about that thing. And therefore your one-on-one is going to be useful useful to you. One thing that you really want to make sure you develop too is what's a good way to give your manager feedback? Sometimes it's casual, sometimes it's face-to-face, sometimes you want to Slack them with thoughts after, but you need to be able to tell your manager what they're doing. And you want to, if they're doing something really well and that works for you and you appreciate it and it's something you've never gotten from a manager before, tell them that so that they make sure that they keep doing it. And if it's something that's not quite working for you, figure out a constructive and professional way to say, hey, this isn't working for me. Which gets to the next point, which is to make sure that you're sharing constructive feedback. Most managers really want that. People want to be a better manager. No one wants their employees going home saying my manager stinks. So how do you go about giving them giving them feedback to help them be better? I am a people manager, and I usually, if it doesn't come up naturally, every other one-on-one, I ask, hey, what can I be doing better to be a manager? Because I don't want to like be too insistent or make it seem like the one-on-one is more about me than about them, because I view it as an opportunity for me to be helping them more, which is why I do every other. And if they don't have anything to say, I just ask them, like, next time we meet, it's really important for me to be better. Can you help me with that? Can you think of something I can do differently? I remember a time where I was having a skip level one-on-one. So it was my manager's manager, and I didn't have anything negative to say about my manager or how we were doing stuff. And it had been a couple that happened a few times. And he was like, I'm going to be really real with you. Like, it's coming. I don't think this is true, but it comes across as like you have nothing critical to say, that you're not looking at things and thinking about how we can do better, and that you're not doing yourselves any favor by suggesting you're just fine with the status quo and you're not going to challenge anything. What I actually think is happening, this is like him talking to me, what he thought was happening with me, which I think was true, is that I didn't want to get my boss in trouble and say anything negative about how we were doing stuff. And he was like, this is a safe space. Like, I'm not asking you to tell on your boss. I'm not asking you to tell me if your manager's doing a bad job. You can love your manager and have a great relationship with them and still recognize either things they're doing or things the business could be doing better than they're doing today. And making sure you develop that skill is going to serve you really well, give you more credibility, and make you seem like a more authentic person, not only with your manager, but in other contexts as well. So even though it can be nerve-wracking or uncomfortable for some people, I think it's super important to push past it. And then just last one, everyone should be adapting. So that's like, you're going to ask your manager to shift their style in a way that works for you, and you're going to need to shift your style in a way that works for your manager. And you might find something in the middle that's not your go-to for either one of you, but that's kind of like the happy point where you get in the middle. Cross-company connections, and what I mean by cross-company is like, or long-distance mentors, or people you don't work with every day. So it might be someone who, like if you work in product management, maybe you occasionally interact with the director on marketing, but you don't always work with them one-on-one. Or you usually do front-end software projects, and very occasionally you'll work with a team that does data analytics, and there's someone on that team that you want to reach out to. So not someone that you never see or that doesn't know who you are, but maybe you see them infrequently. And the hardest part about those connections is like setting them up. So I don't talk to someone all the time. How do I go about asking them to be a mentor or developing that relationship with them? And I think like the easiest, like the best way to do it, that's not always easy and can be even more challenging now that remote work is more common, is like trying to create personal connections. And the best time I have doing that is when I'm on a Zoom meeting waiting for everybody to join. A lot of times people will sit with their camera off, very quietly muted, waiting until they have to put their camera on. If you can be on and the person you want to engage with also has their camera on, just ask them a casual question. How was your weekend? I really like your shirt. Oh, wow, you're wearing a captain's hat. I love the captains. Like, how can you like just kind of create that personal connection that might give you something to follow up with them on later. And then like if you identify someone you think you can learn from them, like don't be afraid to reach out. So my first few mentors, I was really lucky, and they said something along to me like, hey, I like you. I think that I might be able to have some good advice for you. Feel free to put time on my calendar. And I put time on their calendar. One of my strongest and most valuable mentor relationships I have today is with a really great guy named Jeff. And I said, hey, Jeff, I think that I can learn from you. Would you be willing to take some time and do one-on-ones with me, maybe once a month or once a quarter, whatever works for your calendar? And he was like, that sounds great. I'm happy to do that. I'm really flattered that you're asking me. What he did, and which I think might be a useful strategy for people, is he said, I'm not going to say yes or no right now. I'm going to set 3 meetings up, and we're going to have the 3 meetings. And at the end of the 3 meetings, if we feel they're useful, I'll make a longer series that recurs. And I was like, sounds great. And it gave him an out if it wasn't working. It gave me an out if I was wrong in my assessment that I thought he could give useful advice. And it also kind of like put an onus on me to make sure that I use those first 3 meetings to really drive value out of him, to come prepared with something I thought he could help me with. And I did that. And at the end of the first meeting, he was like, I'll keep the 3 meetings now just for convenience, and then we'll reschedule it. But I can already see that this is going to be time well spent for both of us. And Jeff is just awesome because he seems to have the same inner monologue that tells me, like, explain yourself, give a caveat, don't say anything, don't disrupt stuff. But he's pushed past it. And he's a really effective leader who's very well respected and does not seem to silence himself. So I can go to him and talk to him about situations and get advice that feels so on the mark for what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and how I can be better. I was talking to him once about a meeting where I said something and I made a suggestion that didn't really land very well, and people kind of pushed back on it. And I was asking him, like, should I not have said it? Like, I don't know, like, I feel like I should have spoken up, and now people think that I have dumb ideas. And I was kind of going on, he let me go on for like a minute or so. And he's like, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to stop you. Nobody cares. And it's not to say that nobody cares about you or that nobody values what you have to say, but you're sitting here obsessing about something that nobody is thinking about anymore. And like, he could speak to it in a way that like, I knew he had experienced it, and he could just like soothe me. And it's like, sometimes you're not every idea is golden, and that's okay. You can't let it stop you from talking up. And it was just like, this is something, a growth area for me, has been super powerful. Another thing that he noticed that other people have noticed less, or at least talked to me less, is giving caveats. So maybe this isn't good advice, but this, or I don't know if everyone's going to like this, but that. And he's like, just say your idea. Like, people care about your idea. And the only thing you're doing by giving the caveats is kind of diluting it and setting yourself up for people to disagree with you. So again, it came from a place where it was like, he knows what I'm talking about. So I'm really glad that I reached out to him. I'm really glad I was able to build that relationship, one of my most successful ones. And then the other thing about someone you don't work with is like, my work product doesn't affect him for the most part at all. So my meetings with him are about me and what he thinks I can be doing better, and how I can be better asking for the company to serve me, not make sure that, like, my manager, who's totally awesome, right, is highly invested in the success of my thing. So if I'm having trouble with somebody, his outcome is going to want to be, or naturally be inclined to, like, how do you go about resolving the conflict so you can do the thing? Where Jeff's advice to me tends to be more about myself and my own personal development and finding, happiness and satisfaction in my work. And then another mentor I mentioned, Melanie, was really good about her. Is Melanie was she's a woman, and all my other mentors are straight guys. And I work at a company that is heavily sports focused. And I'm not by any means the only LGBT employee, but there aren't tons that I work with regularly. And I would be just in a room with a bunch of straight guys and feel like, oh, I don't want to say something that makes them not want me to be there. And it's totally in my head, and no one did anything to make me feel that way, but it's still a voice that I had, it's still a concern I had. I don't want to be seen as an outsider. And she's like, she had a perspective where she's the only woman in the room. And she's like, I can feel like an outsider, and like, one of the most powerful pieces of advice she gave me that I appreciate so much is, I was talking to her about, like, in a meeting, and I was like, sometimes I have trouble understanding what someone wants from me. And the question I was asking is, how do I better identify what someone wants from me? So it's like, if someone is looking for me to facilitate the meeting, I can do that. If someone is looking for me to find out information, I can do that. But sometimes in a room, and I don't know what this particular person wants from me, and it makes it hard for me to understand, how do I act? Because my default is to figure out what they need from me and be that thing. And she said, you are allowed to just be yourself. Like, I hope you know that. Like, you can come to a meeting and just be you, and you don't have to justify it. You don't have to change who you are, or your focus, or what you want to get out of a meeting just because someone else you're reacting to somebody else. Stop reacting and just be you. And that came from the fact that she, understood what was to be an outsider, and like, my ability to have a connection with her, even though she wasn't in my management chain, super, super helpful. Oops, sorry.
I was going to add too, JB, I think that one resonates for me a lot as well. I think the relationships that I've been able to cultivate either at work or in my broader network, where people do have distance from what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, it relieves pressure from me as well, right? Like there's nothing else I need or want from you other than just to be heard and to hear your perspective. You're not evaluating me at the end of the quarter. You're not, the person on the other end of a job application. You're just someone whose opinion I trust and who has enough perspective and distance from my day-to-day work to give me an honest opinion. So I think your candidness plus that distance really creates like something unique there that you don't get from just your manager or just a peer who's on the same project as you.
100%. It kind of like makes, it's not exactly true to characterize them as neutral, but it makes them feel like a neutral party. Like they're not invested in the outcome. So somehow it seems more sincere or more trustworthy.
Right. And they may not know, if some of your questions or your requests for feedback are related to people that you work with very closely in your behavior relationships with them. If they don't, especially if they don't know those people, I feel like they can bring a very objective lens to it.
100%. And then what's more, when they don't know the people very closely or they're not familiar with the situation, I tend to find that I get advice that is more broadly applicable. So when I'm talking to my manager and they're in the middle of it with me, they're going to help me solve this specific situation. When I'm talking to someone who has some distance and they may not know everybody, they're like, this is a way to think about it. This is an approach you might have. And then sometimes you find yourself in situations where you're like, I don't really know what's going on. Let me use my more general advice. It can be more useful.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And then the next thing is like recognizing when you can be a mentor to other people. So acknowledging that you have knowledge that's worth sharing. It can be really rewarding to help other people in their careers, and in a really pragmatic angle. Like you never know where future opportunities are going to come from. Just because you're a more senior person right now doesn't mean you're always going to be more senior, or that a more junior person can't recommend you, or that a more junior person is not going to be on a hiring team and be able to talk to good experiences they had with you. So I think there's a lot of value there, both pragmatic and then personal. I find tons of reward in like if there's someone I feel like I can help or give advice or perspective to. Product management is not a career path that emphasizes straight lines. So you just never know where things are going to come up, and building a connection with someone who's an engineer or QA person might show up in a job like 10 years later. And you're going to appreciate that you had them there to refer you. You got to be watchful for opportunities. So sometimes people will come to you and ask for something, and they're not per se asking for a mentor, but you can recognize, what it was like to be on the other side, right? Like, hey, I want someone who cares about me and wants to invest in me and give me advice. What are opportunities that you can help with someone else? And sometimes it's like maybe you have a coworker on your team who is much more junior, or someone that you work with, and like they're not in your management chain, you don't work with them directly on projects, but you have a stronger grasp of agile ceremonies than they do. How can I take you out to coffee and just talk to you about agile ceremonies? Or hey, you're struggling with some pushback to doing things in Scrum when everybody at our company wants to do Kanban. I dealt with that. Let me just tell you about how I was able to get buy-in for my team and what some of the challenges are, in case it helps you. And then you can just kind of start that conversation. You want to take it seriously, so make sure you're giving people your full attention. The worst thing is when you're asking someone for advice and it feels like you're distracting them or being a burden to them. So don't have your phone out. Don't be like constantly being interrupted. If you're in an office setting, like getting the opportunity to leave the office together or go to a separate area of the office or a conference room can be super helpful. If you're remote, just making sure that you're focused on the Zoom with your camera on. You're not slacking on the side. But also you want to keep it low stakes. It's like, you can just talk to me. Like, what are you thinking? What are some challenges you have? Why don't you tell me about some goals you have for yourself? And I can give you some feedback on what your goals are, how I think I might be able to help them, or who good people to talk to are. When you can, lean into the tactical. So if you have someone and you think you can teach them a specific skill, like, hey, like, here's a video that I watched about this topic that was super helpful for me. Hey, I found this article. Why don't we both read it and then we can touch base in it and talk about it? Like something actual to do, like can give some definition to something. And also when you're using like a third party, like you're talking together about a book, a video, or article, it takes some pressure off of you to kind of like be the person who has the answers, and you're just connecting over sharing perspectives on something. And it can, that oftentimes can help build a relationship. And the one thing that's super, super important if you are in a mentor or mentor type role is that you want to make sure you're respecting people's privacy and things they tell you in confidence. So there are two categories of things that I cannot keep private in my current job. If I think someone is a danger to themselves or others, I need to let the people team know about it. And if someone is just either saying someone is doing a crime or I'm committing a crime, or describing a scenario in which I perceive their activities to be criminal, I need to let our compliance officer know about those things. If it's not, and luckily I've never been in a position where I had to share that I was compelled to share such information. Everything else is just between us. My manager drives me crazy. I'm really frustrated with this project. I don't really know if I want to stay at this company. All of those things are between me and them. And I've been on the other end too, where I've been able to share thoughts that in the wrong forum might be inflammatory and had my privacy respected. And I want to make sure that I always pay that forward to other people and how I have the opportunity to like advocate for them. So like someone's raising a concern about the way we do something. I think I have an impact to be able to change that. How can I go about doing that without calling them out or making it readily apparent that something came from them? It does take a little bit of effort sometimes, but it's really well worth it because the more people trust you, the better your relationship is. And honestly, like if your goal is to get information to try to make the company better, like you're going to, the more you respect confidence, the more likely people are to come with you with candid feedback.
I think it's great, JB, to hear you say, like imagining you as a mentor, to hear you say those things, to say, you can say things like, I can't stand my manager, or I hate this project I'm on, or I want to leave the company. Just hearing, I'm not even your mentee, but hearing you say those things makes me less tense. So I can imagine like that would be a very helpful framework to set up for someone that you're mentoring, is establishing like what those boundaries are. I think that would do a lot to create rapport and make people feel at ease.
I'm a smoother, so I love putting people at ease. Oops, sorry. The last topic that I wanted to raise today, or last subtopic, is like how do you maintain connections? Melissa, I know you had reached, if Melissa's on the call, you had reached out with this topic. So whether you're watching the video or on the call now, I hope that this answer is helpful to you. The stronger your personal connection, the easier it is to stay in touch. So this just puts more of an onus on you to make sure while you're in the relationship, while it's current, while you're still at the company together, that you find something to connect with. Do you have a shared hobby or interest? Do you watch the same show? How can you take, like, if you watch the same show with somebody and you were like, hey, like the season finale of Legacies was great, and I know that my coworker, this person used to mentor me, likes Legacies as well, I can just send them a message and say, hey, like, did you see that episode? It was great, wasn't it? And basically you want to create opportunities to reach out to somebody where you don't need anything from them, so that when you do reach out, when you do need something, it's not weird that you reached out and doesn't come across as being overly transactional. And so an example of this that I kind of am in mid process of using is another mentor I have, a guy named Jeremy. I meet with him once a quarter. He's a really great guy. And in our last one-on-one, he was talking about, I can't even remember the point he was making with this, but he was like, oh, whenever I'm traveling on a plane, it always amazes me, like, how do planes stand up? And my dad's a physicist, and I always ask him to explain it. And he does his best to explain it, but whatever he's saying doesn't stick with me. And I don't know how planes stay up, but I think it's amazing that planes stay up. And I came across an article that talked about how planes stay up. And as it happens, there are two theories about how planes stay aloft. And neither one fully answers, there's fully mathematically covers everything to be a solid explanation. So the end result is that we don't know how planes stay up, but we can still build planes that stay up, which I think is really amazing. And it's not that we have no idea. Both theories have to do with how air moves over the wings of planes. But I have this article saved. So my plan is partway between my one-on-ones, right? So I meet with him every 3 months, is to say, hey, I found this article. Like, how funny is it? You're not the only one who doesn't know how planes stay up. We don't really know. And just be able to have like that connection. So just thinking about ways that you can reach out to somebody and have something fun to say that's not work related. And especially if it's something that might have the chance for like a small exchange that they can react to and you can have a little bit of a conversation about, I think is really the most successful method. Even if you don't have a super strong personal connection with them, there are ways to do that with work stuff. So if you worked on the same project together, someone was trying to get the company to adopt a specific practice that they didn't, and now they have. Or you know that someone went to a company, maybe they went to work for a video game company, and you know the video game that they were working on just went live and you saw an ad for it. You can reach out and say, hey, congratulations. Like, I just saw this ad for your video game. It made me think of you. How awesome is that? Are you enjoying work? So it's kind of things that are like less about needing something. And you're going to have to find a right balance, because you don't want to be annoying or feel like you don't really have much to say, or that you're saying something that it's hard for the person to figure out how to react to. But you want to find a good balance where you're doing it enough that when it comes up and it's like, hey, I saw your company is hiring a product operations manager. I'm a product operations manager. I'd love to work at your company. You know, can I talk to you about the opportunity? And it doesn't seem weird. Yeah, so hopefully that's helpful advice. The last thing to cover is just resources to consider if you want to learn more. So 2 books that I think are good are Super Connector, Stop Networking and Start Building Business Relationships That Matter, and Give and Take, Why Helping Others Drives Our Success. I think are both good books that directly talk about networking and building personal relationships. The other resources are slightly less on point, but still really valuable. So on the web, there's the Work Friend column from the New York Times. Some stuff is like, it's all of it's related to like being a professional, oftentimes in an office environment, which is works really well for product managers. There might be some, like not every column is going to be directly related to networking or building personal relationships, but there's a lot of stuff in there that can be helpful. And then there's this askamanager.org, which is a great website where people like kind of like an advice column where people will say, hey, like I'm having this experience, like you as a manager, what do you think about it? And sometimes it's just honestly entertaining to read. But more than that, it gives you an insight into how managers think, both the person who answers the question. So I think I often find strong alignment with their management style and my own, but also like people explaining the problem to you. Because sometimes we're in work and it's like, why did someone do that? Like that seems so out of left field that they would think that that was a good idea. And then someone writes in and like they explain their thought process and you're like, oh, I wonder if that's what this other person was thinking when something seems completely absurd to me. This is how they rationalized it in their mind. And at least I can understand what they were doing, even though I still don't agree with it. And then the last thing is the TED Talks. So their videos, I think they're really awesome. Most of them are around 10 minutes. If you go to that link, there is an option to filter by business category. So the business ones, much like the New York Times column, are all going to be related to business. Some of them are not going to be related to networking, and might be like, how can we have more green businesses? How can we have less carbon emissions? Which is not relevant to this topic at all, but you'll see things about like, how do you build relationships? How do you how can you be more an effective communicator? And then also like the more general things, unfiltered, is it, like I mentioned just in the previous slide about having something fun to bring up with somebody. Like as you learn more about people, you might see a random TED Talk on something you weren't anticipating seeing a TED Talk on. And that's like the kind of thing like that, and resources like it where you can be like, hey, we talked about skiing in Utah, and here's this video about skiing in Utah. Like, how funny is that? And then you have an opportunity to reach out to them. So that's the end of the presentation. I think is that going to get shared with everyone, Hillary?
Yeah, I was going to make a note about that actually. If you're okay with that, so what I typically do is share out a link to the deck, a link to the recording, and then any notes that came through in the chat. So if you guys end up sharing, recommendations or insights with one another through the chat, I try to summarize those in my follow-up as well. So I'll send that all through email to anyone who registered for the event. And then also if you're in the BPMA Slack channel, I'll include that as well in the events channel. So both ways, no matter how you signed up, you should get a copy of all of this.
Awesome. That sounds really great. I'll make sure the link for the deck is accessible to everybody. And then just to call out, my LinkedIn profile is here. Please feel free, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. The only thing I just ask is to send in your note, hey, it's from this event. Sometimes random salespeople try to connect with me and like tell me like light bulbs or solar panels, which is not part of my job. So knowing that that's not the category you're in is super helpful for me, and makes it likely that makes it for sure that I'll accept the connection.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Appreciate that. Great. Well, thanks for walking through that, JB. That was awesome. And so I have a few questions on my end, and then I saw one come in from Evangeline. Do you mind just unmuting and just sharing it from there?
So my name's Evangeline. I'm actually an MBA student right now, and I'm working on an assignment. I'm in a class called Unlocking Your Potential, and I'm going to different networking events. So I was hoping to ask a couple of questions about people's professional challenges that they have, and if they can give me any insights on how they work with these professional challenges.
Yeah, maybe JB, you can share your perspective on that. And then if anyone else wants to through the chat as well, feel free.
Sure. To just reflect back to make sure I'm understanding, you just want me to identify like a business challenge I'm having at work and how I'm going about
Yeah,
solving it.
just the general. The question is, your job role. You already explained your job role and stuff like that. So any professional interests or challenges that you have faced during your career path that you want to discuss. And obviously I'll put this into a template and stuff like that.
Sure. In operations, being product operations manager, a challenge that I dealt with a couple times in different forms has been basically generating buy-in. So thinking about DraftKings in particular, right? When I joined, I was around employee 200. It was a relatively small company, and I don't think it really counted as a startup anymore. But they're definitely trying to hold on to that startup culture, which is a little bit more freeform and has a strong predisposition that opposes process. So it's like, hey, you're trying to make my life more complicated. I just want to do this thing and get the job done. So how do I go about generating buy-in for ideas like, hey, there's a specific way we should do stuff. So we have 12 different departments. Like we shouldn't have 12 ways of doing it. It's easier for everybody if we have one way of doing it. Part of like solving it has been kind of back channeling and connecting with people to understand what their concerns might be so that I can come up with direct answers for them, or connecting with people who are like, on my side to like say, hey, like, what do you think Brian's going to complain about with this? Like, how can I be ready to address Brian's concerns? Because Brian always has a problem with process. I'm making someone up, right? Fictitious Brian. And then how to follow up on it. So because I'm a smoother, I like don't want, like if someone pushes back, like I don't want to make a big deal about it. I don't want to insist on my point and feel like I'm being disruptive to the flow of conversation in a meeting. So how can I learn to be better at holding my ground, and like it doesn't make me a bad person, doesn't make me disruptive or make the meeting less valuable, to say like this is why I think it's really valuable and I hear your concern, but that doesn't actually change what I think the value is in doing it this way, and being able to kind of like show people that I'm really invested in it and it's not a fleeting thought, have been some things that have helped me with that challenge.
Thank you so much. That was great.
I think relevant to this topic too, because the more you can build out those relationships with people, the more likely you are to get buy-in.
Yes.
Great. So I had a couple too that we had written down beforehand that I'd love to ask. You had mentioned resources. Are there any, product communities, whether they're local or, national, global, what have you, that you found to be helpful for people to join or read up more on, that have kind of helped you to strengthen those networking connections?
So I don't have a really great answer for this question right now. Everything is kind of stale. So I have like before COVID, but pre-COVID, I tried to take advantage of different and networking opportunities, particularly through business resource groups. So we would either host or be invited to participate in events that were focused on LGBT people in tech, or like out in tech. Out in tech is a really good one that I do participate in, that is not focused just on product, but all areas of technology. So that's a really good one. And they have virtual events that I still go to. But when you hear about people going to a conference, like kind of like being more opportunistic about it is kind of how I've been doing it lately. Yeah. So I apologize. I don't have like a really
That's okay. And I was actually kind of hoping you'd mention Out in Tech, because I attended a panel presentation that you were a part of months ago, and I was hoping to find out if it was recorded and we could share it with this group too.
It was. So I
Okay.
will find a link and share it with you.
Thanks. Looks like there's another one. Cece, I hope I'm saying your name right, but do you mind just unmuting and asking? I think it went directly to me as opposed to the group. Are you there, Cece? If not, I can read it out loud. It's okay. So her question was, for the T-shaped slide, it appears that the adjacencies you listed for the horizontal seem to be my understanding of what PMs coordinate. What examples do you have for the vertical line of depth?
Sure. So when I think about product management and that vertical line of core expertise, I think about competitive analysis or business intelligence, but essentially the idea of how does your company's offerings compare to competitors' offerings, and are there opportunities for you to do something better or do something different? Basically business casing. So when I think of business casing, I mean creating financial projections based on data you do have about your users or data you have available about consumer behavior more generally, to say, hey, our company will make money by doing X. So at DraftKings, it might be introducing a new game type in DFS or offering a new type of game in the casino, because you at least the way it works at DraftKings is like you have ideas and you have to convince people that it is a good priority to spend time on. So we do this process called scorecarding. So like that in and of itself is also a good skill. So how can you pull out objective elements of your project and be able to compare them against other things and then communicate that with stakeholders, especially when the answer might be no, like really great idea. I know you want this, but it's just not going to happen this year because we're oversubscribed. But being able to more articulately explain, like, here are the things that we are doing, here's how we measured stuff, and this is why this idea this idea would make us $3,000 versus this other idea that will make us $3 million. Like, we're going to do the $3 million idea. Writing good specs and user stories are other, so that being able to identify what should be MVP versus what just follow up. If you're using an agile environment, I think a lot of companies do that today. How do you incorporate and react to user feedback and user pain points in your features? And then the last thing that comes to mind is like measuring success for your thing. So you delivered your project, you hopefully hit your date on time, but something is out there. How do you know if you did the right thing? How do you go back and measure your business case against reality and understand differences? If you over or underperformed, what factors do you think went into that? And how can you use that to one, refine your own practice of product management, but two, also like use it to show that you're someone who's trustworthy, that if you think something's gonna be a good idea, like, we can trust your judgment.
Yeah, I would definitely second both user research and measuring success through data. I think those are two areas where there's always more to learn. Like those are two areas where I think I've learned the most over the past 2 or 3 years in product work. That I feel like it's just a bottomless pit. You can continue learning forever. Great. I did have one other question on my side, and then for anyone else, last call for just if you want to put any last questions in the chat, feel free to drop them in. But my question, JB, was around working with difficult people and building relationships. So I was wondering if you had any insight or advice on how to build those strong relationships with other people, whether they're peers or managers. You kind of alluded to this in the manager slide, but who you perceive to be really difficult to work with. So you're trying to form those relationships, but they're just not the person you would typically, side up to at lunch or naturally connect with.
So I think the best first step is trying to have a sense of empathy. So I've encountered many difficult people, but very few people who are purposely trying to be difficult. And sometimes the thing causing them to be difficult is they just don't realize how they're coming across. Or which I think is a little bit more common, is like they have a lot of pressure on them. So what you're seeing is their stress, not their desire to not be helpful. So coming in with an empathy and saying like, okay, like, you're not a bad person. You're not like, I'm having trouble working with you, but that doesn't make you a difficult person to work with. Sometimes like that doesn't hold up, but at least trying to go in it that way can be very helpful. And then thinking about how you might be able to solve a challenge for them. So like understanding like what are some of their biggest pain points, and is there a way you can impact that? Hey, can I take this meeting off of your plate and I'll run it? Or can I, hey, why don't we work together on something, and I can do the first draft and then you can react to it. In particular, opportunities where you might be able to collaborate with someone on something, I think are super helpful. It's kind of risky because if someone is so difficult, then like collaborating with them can feel like everyone's been on bad group projects, whether at school or at work. So you don't want to volunteer yourself for a super bad project. But if you have the opportunity, you think you might be able to figure out like what their perspective is and speak to something. Has been super helpful. Like there's one coworker who, Otto, who's really great. He used to be my manager, and now we work together on some projects. But one thing I value about him is that we can work together on projects, and we can each like speak to the end result the same way. So if I give the presentation or he gives a presentation, the content of the presentation doesn't change, which I contrast with some other people that if they're giving the presentation, they're going to just give their point of view and not the shared point of view that we worked really hard to come up with, which can be really frustrating. So working through and making sure that you have that compromised outcome is something else that helps. And like at the end of the day, like there's just some people where you recognize the relationship isn't going to be better. So how do you just like be really tactical? Like we're going to have this meeting. I need to get this done. I'm going to try my best. And like sometimes my best is inhibited by like I couldn't convince someone to do something, so I'm just going to go with it. And how do I get the thing done and move on with my day? Because there's like, let's say there's like 30 people I work with and or have different levels of involvement with right now. If one of them is bad, like let me focus on the other 29. So I don't want that to be like the go-to advice, but sometimes you just got to recognize that the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Great phrase. I don't think I've heard that one before. Great. So again, last call for any last questions in the chat, but I did want to add, I think there's maybe a hand up. Victor, sounded like you had a question.
I put a hand up, not a question, but I saw also in the chat you posted, feel free to share resources related that I may be helpful. So two came to mind and I wanted to share them. One was, there's this website called lunchclub.com, and it's like this little AI matchmaking thing, and it pairs you up for one-on-one little Zoom hangouts. It's kind of weird, but they've been around for a little bit. They raised some money. They're trying to make like a company out of it. Not like a proponent, but it was cool because when I applied for a product manager in this job a year back, I had like a one-on-one 45-minute chat with another current product manager. And so it actually helped. It didn't do much, but I told like my head of product, like, oh, I know this person. We're like kind of friends maybe. And they're like, oh, huh, cool. So, take that for what it is. And then two is that over the past year, I haven't done anything with this yet, but I think it's in the right direction. I have these different like finance triggers in Crunchbase that I run, which is like a database for startups that I track like financing rounds from top venture capital firms, and then just see like what companies are getting funded. And then I connect, and then I just stalk them on, I have like this monthly reoccurring thing that I find they're like heads of product and their CEOs and companies that I just genuinely like because they're doing something in my area of expertise or things that are interesting. I will just reach out to them on LinkedIn. If they connect with me back, I send them a quick message and say, hey, I think your company is super cool because of X, Y, and Z. And they typically respond and they're like, oh, that's super kind of you. And I like never got a job that way, but at least maybe it puts a smile on their face. Maybe not. They probably don't care. But that's just a little two things that came to mind for me.
Yeah, I love those. I was gonna say the lunch club one. I just put the link in the chat. Tell me if that's the right one or not.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay. I was gonna say that sounds a lot like, does anyone else use Donut Buddies on Slack? I don't know if that's an internal.
Yeah, pretty
I think
similar.
it's an integration with Slack that some companies use. Our company does, where it randomly pairs you with someone for a one-on-one every so often. So you can set it to, I want to do a one-on-one with someone every 2 weeks. And we have, I think we have one Slack channel using Donut Buddies for the whole technology team. And then we have another Slack channel for just product managers. And so eventually I left because I had cycled through all of the product managers and started getting duplicates. But if you have an opportunity to use it at your organization, it was great because it just got you meeting people who you otherwise would never have crossed paths with in the organization, which is great. But I was going to say, that sounds like a, extra organization version of Donut Buddies to me, which sounds great. I'll definitely check it out.
Yeah, I think things like that are awesome. And sometimes it's just fun, especially if you're a product manager, you probably work in technology, seeing what else is out there and what different things stick. And you find out what things don't work for you by trying them. So the best case scenario is that you find something that works for you and it's cool that you or create a good story out of it. And the worst case scenario is that you tried something and it was an experience, but you're like, okay, like I learned something about myself about what's good or not. But these both sound really cool. And as far as like reaching out to LinkedIn and like whether or not it matters, like when people reach out to me on LinkedIn and say something nice, it always makes my day. And it's always helpful because you never know what role someone might be trying to fill. So if, like what usually happens when someone reaches out to LinkedIn is I look at their profile and like something might connect later down the line. So it's I'm not saying it's like the highest probability outcome, but it's always worth the shot if you're willing to do that exercise. So I think that's a really awesome strategy you have there.
Yeah, I would say the same. I have been trying more lately to respond to actual humans who reach out in LinkedIn, and typically only don't respond if it's very clearly some sort of a spam. But even people saying like, hey, looks like you might be a good fit for this particular role. And even if it's something I'm completely not interested in, at least responding and saying, I'm content where I'm at now, but please keep me on your list for the future has been a good strategy too. Great. Any last questions for JB? Either feel free to raise a hand or put it in the chat. But before we wrap up, I was going to add just a couple of quick things. One is to just share the link to the mentorship program on the website. So just drop that in the Zoom chat. Just a great opportunity to check out. Again, if you're in product or you're interested in breaking into product, check it out. It's a good opportunity to be paired with someone and kind of exercise a lot of what JB talked about in terms of a mentorship relationship. And then I just wanted to drop a note. We don't have them posted yet, but we do have a couple of events that will be coming up in the next few months. So our May event will be focused on being a data-driven product manager. And our June event will likely be a panel with several people from the product field at different levels, talking about product strategy. So a couple of other opportunities to learn more about product work, improve your skills, no matter what level you're at. And then the last thing I wanted to share is just a quick link to a survey. I'll send it out, I'll put it in the Zoom chat, but I'll also send it out in the follow-up email in case you don't happen to open it before you drop today. But we'd love for you to fill out the survey. We'll be able to just capture some feedback on how you liked the event, what went well, what could have been better, and just some thoughts on topics for next events that you'd like to see. So we're trying to crowdsource as many ideas as we can from the BPMA community. So please give your input and we appreciate it. And if you happen to have any follow-up questions as well, sounds like it's okay to reach out to JB, but feel free to also drop it in the BPMA Slack channel or just reach out to me or Prachi directly. We're happy to always take suggestions or feedback outside of that survey too. So thank you so much, JB, for your time today and your insights. This was awesome. Really appreciate your time and your expertise and your knowledge. It was great to learn from you.
It was a really great evening. Thank you so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk about something that I'm really passionate about. So it's been awesome, and I hope that other people found some value as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, JB.
Thanks,
everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
Bye, Tara. Bye, everyone.
Bye.